and I'm going to present now. All right, so you need to give me some confirmation when you're seeing my screen. All right, so you should be seeing my screen.
Yes, sir.
All right, you seeing anything at all? Oh,
Yes,
sorry.
sir. You are presenting to everyone.
Okay, so what I wanted to do was to turn off my camera. Why do I do that? So it'll be less images stuff to worry about. Okay, where I'm going to the e-classroom. All right, I've been adding stuff to it today. Let's just make sure I'm still active on it. All right, so you turn editing off because I know that could be a little thing. All right, so has everybody been able to interact with the material and do quizzes so far? I've uploaded Unit 2. It may sound strange because I brought Unit 4 up. Unit 1, then Unit 4, now I'm back to Unit 2. So it may look a little strange, but the information is out of order. But it's the nature of how I'm dealing with the presentation of these items. All right. There's a quiz up already. There are a couple of YouTube videos, and of course the presentation, which I'll go through today with you all. That presentation has built-in videos in it, so I'll skip that over when I'm looking at it, because you all can look at the videos by yourselves. So I'm discussing some of the things, and then I'm finding videos that might be able to, add some more explanation to it. And I've embedded them in the presentation itself, but I know some people are having problems with it, and therefore I know people were saying just post them on the thing. But for those of you who want to use the video connections directly in the presentation, then all you really need to do is to enable the content to be active. That's the main thing you have to do. All right, let me get some responses from people before I move into looking at this content with you all. Everybody's understanding everything. They're following everything thus far.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes, sir. Have you been having any issues with the quizzes and stuff? Stuff you all want to get maybe extra time or more attempts or something along those lines?
No. Well, not for me.
My only issue is as a firefighter, a lot of the firefighters coming down with the COVID-19 virus, so the rest of us who don't have that have to pick up double shift and everything. No, when they quarantine, we had to pick up double shift to fill the stations that quarantine. So I kind of running out of time when I have to do that.
All right, so this
especially
is Steel, right?
Driver. Yeah.
This is Marcus.
Yeah.
Marcus, what you need to do when you run into situations like that is message me privately, and I can allow you extra access because yours is a matter of national emergency issues. It's not because you sleep late and that kind of stuff. In any case, if people are having work-related issues, I don't have a problem with reopening the presentations for you all, or reopening quizzes and that kind of stuff. I don't have. Let me turn on my thing here. I don't have no problems with doing that, guys, because honestly, the way in which the class is built, it's built with one, an idea of a generic student, but the generic student never exists. it's built with the assumption that students will be able to log on when they need to and that kind of stuff, but it doesn't always work that way. And unfortunately, what will happen is that if you are having issues, you just need to let me know, and I will try to, allow you all the extra time that is necessary. Okay. So don't be afraid to ask for that extra time. It doesn't matter really, because the speed at which you're going to be going through things is going to not necessarily be the same with everybody else. But especially if you're having work-related issues, feel free to send me a message, and I will try to make some arrangements with you directly. All right, Marcus? And
Yes, sir.
that doesn't only hold. It doesn't only hold for you. It holds for everybody. If anybody has, like, for example, Deborah might not be working for the fire station, but she might have some personal problems that took place at home. Like, for instance, I have gone through now 2 periods of quarantine. I'm closing off a second set because somebody else in my house was tested and we went into quarantine again. So I don't know what's happening in people's homes. I mean, it's not something that people are just, broadcasting everything everywhere. So if you're having an issue, feel free to message me privately and we can make some arrangements. It's not a big problem at all. All right, guys?
Yes, sir.
No problem.
Okay, so Cindy, what was that?
I said thank you for extending that opportunity.
Well, again, you'd find that not all lecturers will do that. I'm just letting you all know. It's not all lecturers will do that. I'm just warning you all. You can ask other lecturers, but it may not happen. I don't know what the issue is, but sometimes some people just kind of get on, kind of weird. I don't know. Oh wait, see, Miss Springer just arrived. Hi, Miss Springer.
Mr.
Oh, sorry, my bad.
Yes, sir. Here, well, no.
I didn't even see when he came in. You done? Who else is there? Karen, Rizal, Marcus, Monica, Nisha Bash, Linton. Mr. Badri is here too. Hi, Mr. Badri, how are you? Mr. Badri, can you speak? All right, so going back to the presentation. All right, everybody's seeing this PowerPoint, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So this is the unit on demand and supply, and this is available for you all online for you all to go through. Basically, these are the things that we're going to try to do here in terms of the learning outcomes from the unit. So it's really all about demand, and there's some elements here that sort of the word is right. So for instance, explain how graphs and illustrations are used in economics, explain how graphs are used to show relationships, positive, direct. That's kind of going to be inbuilt into when you start to see the graphs being used, you should see the direct and indirect and that kind of stuff coming up. All right. So, and then of course we're going to be looking at the other side of demand, which is supply, and how that works. And then we're going to be looking at them together in the market situation and how they work together to determine prices. And then we're going to be looking at when governments intervene, the type of interventions that they utilize. I think there's a question about this, if I'm not mistaken, in your individual assignments. Is there a question about
Yes, sir.
yeah,
the first individual assignment.
yeah, the first individual. Some of this stuff is going to be dealt with you going through some of it yourself. But I found some material that I added to the presentation. So this is that should help you with that. So this is the definition of demand. All right. So it's one that we tend to utilize, that is the sort of like go-to definition that we utilize for demand. It is the underlined words are the conditions that need to be held when we're looking at demand: the willing and able, given price and given time. Because if you change those conditions, then the amount of goods or services that somebody will demand will change. So let's deal with the first, willing and able. So it is the amount of a good or service that an individual is willing and able. So there are two elements there that we're looking at: willingness and capacity to actually execute. So able means that you have to have the resources necessary to actually buy something. You know, there are a lot of things you want to get, but if you don't have the resources to get it, which is the money in our case, then you can't buy it. So we're not really concerned about all the things you wish you had, but those things that you can get and those things you can afford, those are the things that we're going to pay attention to. Now, willingness is another element. So you have the ability, but are you also willing? So the two must combine with each other. And what happens is, at different times in your life, what you're willing to do at one time, you may not necessarily be willing to do at another time. So consider, for example, when you were younger, you might have been willing to take all of the savings that you had and spend it on sweets and candy. But that's because you were a child and those things were very important. So you were willing to do that. Thank God you didn't have the ability to do as much of that. Because if you consider the nature of how we live, then you'd realize that if you had the ability to do everything you wanted to all times in your life, you'd probably make some really bad decisions about what you bought or what you consumed. Whoa. Okay, I just had a electrical spike. Are you all still with me?
Yes, sir.
All right. Generally, when I get spiked like this, I'm sorry. Miss Miller, that was you?
Sir, I also had this spike.
Okay. Where do you live?
Valencia.
Right. So I live in Valencia too. So, and you know, we had an outage yesterday, so that wasn't a good thing. All right. So, well, so any questions about the willingness and the ability of an individual to do something? For clarification. Right. If I hear nothing, then I'm assuming that everybody's okay with that. Now, the other two conditions, given price and given time. So at a given price, let's say there's an item for sale for $10. You might want to buy X amount, maybe 10 or 15 of them at $10. But if the price were to change, then the quantity that you're going to buy will change with it. So that's the nature of how that works. Similarly, given time. So, okay, Christmas is approaching. So there's certain things at Christmas you're going to want to buy given time. You understand? Things like ham and alcohol and those kind of things that you generally splurge on during that period of time. But at any other time of the year, you may not be willing to do that. So when time changes and when price changes, it also affects the quantity of those goods that you're willing to buy. That's why this definition kind of holds across the board for everything. All right. And then that brings us then to this part of the thing, which is the first law of demand. So it states that the law of demand states that as prices rise, the quantities demanded decrease, and as prices fall, the quantities demanded increase. Ceteris paribus. Now, that is logical because as human beings, when we want to get something, we're looking for the best price possible. So if the price of the item falls, we tend to buy more of the good, or demand will increase when prices fall, but they will decrease when prices rise. And that is the inverse relationship between prices and quantities demanded. Now, the term ceteris paribus, which is there in italics, means that the only thing we're changing at this point in time is price. Everything else is held constant. So for those of you who went through that section on scientific methodology, and we're proceeding by science, this is one of the conditionalities that we talk about. In scientific experiments, what we try to do is to change one factor at a time only, and that way observe what happens when we change one factor at a time. If we don't do that, then we can't really make laws about these things, because then we'll be kind of guessing, because if we change price and some other things simultaneously and we get this reaction, then we can't trust that this is the only reaction that prices will have to our quantities demanded. So the general law, which has been tested through many times, it is that when prices rise, the quantities demanded will fall or decrease, and when prices fall, the quantities demanded will increase, meaning that ceteris paribus, meaning that all other conditions that can affect your demand is held constant. Things like your income, taste, preference, and we'll see what those things are in a little bit. Any questions on that? That's fairly straightforward. When we draw the relationship, it's going to be an inverse relationship. So that inverse relationship you'd see is that when prices rise, the quantities demanded fall, and that is where we have an inverse relationship. So that the type of graph that we're going to draw is going to be downward sloping from left to right. All right, which we'll see in a little bit. All right, so when we're developing demand, we start by looking at the individual. So an individual schedule or demand schedule is just this table that shows the quantities that every individual will be willing to buy of a particular good at various prices over given time frames. The market demand will add together all the individuals that make up that market, and that market demand schedule will now represent the total of, or the tabular total of what's happening in the market for everybody over a different range in price. Now, everybody's not going to react the same way. Different households react differently to changes in price. There some elements of this we're not going to go into, which is things like elasticity and marginal utility theory, but it's going to play a little part in this here. And then when we graph the information, then we derive what we call the demand curve. All right, prices measured on the vertical axis, quantities measured on the horizontal axis, and the demand curve for an individual consumer or group of consumers, which is the market, will be downward sloping from left to right. So I think this here, that what you're looking at here, is a demand schedule, and you'd see that you have prices, then you have two individuals, Tracy and Darren, and then you have totals in ton. Now, this is for potatoes on a monthly basis. Now, anybody willing to share how much potatoes is buy on a market run? Anytime they go to the market? 5 pounds, 10 pounds, how much do you buy?
5 pounds.
5 pounds? How many people in your household?
3.
3, all right. And that 5 pounds will last you for the month?
About 2 weeks.
About 2 weeks. So that means 10 pounds will be better for the 2 weeks then.
Yes.
Right, but you may not want to buy it all at once. Why?
So if 5 pounds lasts for 2 weeks, why 10 pounds would be better for 2 weeks?
Right, so if 10 pounds during the month,
Yeah,
that's what the point is trying to say. 5 pounds for every 2 weeks, 10 pounds for the month. All right. But if you had a family that was probably larger, anybody has a larger family and buys more potatoes? Or smaller family and buys less potatoes? Nope, nobody. All right. So the idea would be that for different households, you would have different demands even at the same price. So you'd see, for example, here we have, if I can get a pointer going. All right. So if you look here at A, we're dealing with a price of 20. Well, they have this as pence per, but think about this as 20 cents per kilogram. All right. Most people, like Tracy's demanding 28, but Darren's only demanding 16. And the total demand when we add up everybody in the market is 700 tons of potatoes as opposed to the kilograms here. All right. And as prices go up, as we go down from A, B, C, D, E, and we are at 100 pence per kilogram, you'd see that Tracy's demand falls to 0, but Darren's demand falls only to 6. You seeing that? And total demand falls down to 100 tons of potatoes. Now, when we graph that, this is the relationship that we're going to be looking at here. This is what I was talking about. The market demand curve for potatoes or for any good that is normal will be downward sloping from left to right. Each one just representing the demand from A here, the lowest price, to E, the highest price of 100. So you can see that from the previous table here. You can see the relationship as we took it there. What we plotted now was the prices and the total demand. So that when we went here, you're looking at, remember, for the highest price of 100 pence. So you have prices on the y-axis, quantities demanded on the y-axis. So you have 100 here at 100 pence, only 100 tons of potatoes is demanded. But at 20 pence or 20 cents, let's use that equivalent, 700 tons of potatoes is demanded in the market. So this is giving us this downward sloping curve that is what we could refer to as the demand curve. All right, so that speaks to the demand function. So what happens? This is something you all have to pay attention to. Changes in price cause movements along the demand curve. So when we have a change in price, it causes us to move along the demand curve from one place to the other. So for example, a demand curve is constructed on the assumption that other things remain equal, ceteris paribus. That's the phrase we talked about. It is assumed that none of the other determinants of demand other than price changes. The effect of a change in price is simply illustrated by the movement along the demand curve. For example, from point B to point D, in figure 2.1 here, from D to B to D, we're looking at where prices rise from 40 pence to 80 pence. So from 40 pence to 80 pence here, we're looking at the movement along the curve from point D to point B, from B to D per kilo. And the quantities demanded decrease from 500 down to 200. Now, if the price had gone down from 80 to 40, then we would have gone from D to B. But again, the only way to move from D to B is to have prices change. And that's the main thing that we need to get this, that when prices change, it causes us to move along one demand curve. All right. So the quantities demanded change. All right. So we need to remember that, because these what we call other determinants of price, they're also referred to sometimes as non-price determinants. And these are the 5 non-price determinants. These change the total demand because the impact that these have would affect the quantity, the amount that you would buy, regardless of price. All right. So if there's a change in fashion and taste, so we're talking about potatoes. So one of the things that's affecting potatoes is the fact that a lot of new diets and nutrition programs are talking about the dangers of starch in your diet and too much starch. So potatoes might be one of those things that people, as a result of changing fashion and taste, they're removing from their diet. But how we're going to reflect that is not by a movement along the curve, but the whole curve shifting to the left or to the right, indicating that the demand is going to react to this changing situation or non-price determinant in the market. So there are other things here that we talked about: change in taste and fashion, changes in the number and prices of substitutes and complementary goods, changes in the level of income and its distribution in the economy, expectation of changes in the future, and changes in government policy. Whenever these things change, we don't illustrate that the impact of that by movements along the curve. We look at them as being illustrated through shifting of demand curves. So this is where you would have a demand curve shifting either to the left, which means it's to the right, which means it's increased in demand at all prices, or it will shift to the left, which means it is decreased in demand at all prices. All right. So whenever there's a change in those demand, those non-price determinants of demand, they lead to shifting of the demand curves. Now, this is one of the things you have to get clear in your mind, because we tend to ask a good bit of questions about what would happen if this happens. And really and truly, what we're trying to get you to distinguish is whether or not the thing you're looking at is a price determinant or a non-price determinant, because that will show us what we're talking about there. And that's what this video is about, that you could look at. So as I said before, it's embedded in the PowerPoint presentation. Oops, my bad. Okay, I am going back to my presentation. All right, I kind of moved fast. So as I said, it's embedded here, so it should work. All right, well, you'd have to track it back here to the beginning. All right, so you guys can look at this on your own. Are you all finding these videos useful, guys, by the way?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, the guys are a little annoying.
Yes, sir.
But the explanations are quite good. Everybody's okay with that, right?
Yes.
All right, cool. So let's move to the next slide. And the next slide has to do with supply. So this is the other side of the market. The market is made up of demand and supply. So supply is the quantity of goods or services that a firm is willing and able to produce or provide at a given price and a given time. Now, it's the same thing like a consumer. We as consumers are affected by our willingness and ability. Firms are the same way. Are they willing to produce this good? What will make them willing? Willingness will be determined by profitability. Do they have the capacity to produce the good? Do they have the resources required to produce it? That will determine their ability. Then how much they produce will be dependent upon their price that is being asked for it, or the price that the market has been asking for it, as well as the time frame that they're working in. And this is especially true if you think about farming goods, agricultural products. Different times of the year, the prices for certain goods tend to be high, and that will encourage people to want to produce it, but it may not be the season for it. So seasonally, some items might be off. Consider, for example, coming up for Christmas, you're going to expect sorrel to suddenly start to come up on the market. And generally, you're going to find a lot of sorrel comes on the market. Why? Because that's a kind of traditional thing here. It's one of our customs, or one of the things that we like for the period, because of whatever reason it is that has made sorrel something that is traditional in our experience, and that is a taste or preference that we have. Can you think of any other things for Christmas that would impact upon or only come up during Christmas time in a lot of households?
Yeah, pastel.
Pastel, there you go. So you're going to see a lot of that coming onto the market, more so than there's not that pastel wasn't available all the time, but we have this thing that we want to see more of it during this period of time. because it's become traditional. And with pastel comes the complement to pastel. What's the complement to pastel? What must you have to eat pastel? Come on, guys.
Punta crab.
Chow
No,
chow.
chow to eat. You see the alcohol?
And ham, chow chow, all those things come up at Christmas time.
Exactly, and
Punta
therefore,
crab.
well, right. But I wouldn't say punch crème is something I must have when I eat a pastel, but
No,
definitely
but
I
at
need.
Christmas time, those things we demand more of it around that season.
Correct. But what I was thinking of was another aspect of economics. Complementary to a pastel is some
Oh,
chow. You understand? Complementary means that the consumption of one good requires the consumption of another. I don't have to have
I'm a
panchakrem
chow chow.
with a pastel, but for most of us, a pastel and chow chow is the thing. And now you can get pastel and chow chow at different. You get different types of pastel, even vegetarian pastel, and you get chow chow in different degrees of spiciness. Hot, mild, and fall down dead. Moruga spice. Things like that. All right, so as we're talking about those things, one of the things I want you to do is to try and relate these things to your everyday life as much as you can, because that way you remember these things. So suppliers will change their willingness and ability to supply goods given price, given time. All right, so this is the point I'm trying to make. That then takes us to the law of supply. Now, the law of supply is the reverse to the law of demand. Because if you remember, the law of demand states that when prices rise, quantities demanded fall. But in supply, it states that when prices rise, the quantities supplied increase. Why? Why would suppliers increase the quantities of goods that they're producing when prices go up? Anybody wants to risk?
Profit. Profit.
Very
Profit.
good.
All
That's
about
right.
money.
Because remember, at the end of the day, the reason why a firm exists is to make profits. And therefore, when prices rise, the possibility of making greater profits is high, and that will encourage them to produce more goods. And therefore, the opposite is also true. When prices fall, the quantity supplied decrease because the profit making is smaller. Ceteris paribus, meaning again that we're holding everything else besides prices constant. Now, that means the relationship between supply and price is a positive or direct relationship. So you're going to see, therefore, that we're speaking here to that direct or positive relationship. So the shape of the curve that will represent a supply curve will be opposite to what we see with the demand curve. So we'll see that in a little bit as we go through that. And there it is. So again, the same way we have supply curves, demand curves being generated from every consumer in the market, supply curves will also be made up from every supplier in the market. Now, in the case here, they're staying with potatoes, and it means that they're looking at farmers. So at different prices, the farmers are willing to supply more to the market. So you see at the lower prices, they're willing to supply smaller quantities, but as prices go up, they're willing to produce more to bring to the market. And that's how the suppliers react. And we have the supply curve below there one time that is indicating to you the positive slope of this curve. It's positive because as you move along the curve, both variables X and Y rise together. So that's what we call a positive relationship. All right? Making sense so far?
Question here, sir.
Sorry?
A question here.
Yes, go ahead.
When the if you're looking at farming goods, how would the farmer know, like, how much to supply? Because they have to actually grow the goods, so it's take a while for them to grow the goods. So how
So
would
what
they
they
know?
right. So what they try to do in developed markets, not so much our market here, but in developed markets, what farmers try to do is to sell their goods in what is called the future market. All right. Now this is where things start to get a little tricky. It means that if the prices are higher in the future market, they will plant more now. You follow? All right. So this might be a concept that a lot of you are maybe new to you, which is
No
okay.
future market.
Right. So in the futures market, farmers really will be willing to sell, produce more goods if the price is higher. All right. Now, the good thing about producing in the futures market is that you get paid now for something that you're going to produce in the future. The problem is that you can't be exactly sure what's going to happen in the future. So in the future, you may sell your goods at $60 or 60 pence here per kilogram. But when that time actually comes around, the market price is actually 100. That means the farmer has lost out for 40 cents on their sales. But because they locked themselves into the 60 cents, they have already assured themselves of that income. In our country, we don't have that type of forward selling market system. People produce their goods, farmers here, not manufacture, but grow their crops and then bring it to market and take what they get. So if they're lucky and they get into a market situation where the quantities being supplied are relatively low, then they can call a higher price and they'll get it. But if they go into a market where there's lots of supply, then they're going to be forced to take a lower price. And that's because our market kind of works on that seasonal basis. So that's why you'd see during certain seasons, you'll start to see lots of goods hitting the market and the prices are going to drive lower and lower. And that's the nature of the market system. But it doesn't necessarily mean it does well for the farmer, because the farmer is forced to take whatever small prices they can get. Sometimes the farmers are not making any money at all or not making any profits at all. They may be just breaking even, or worse yet, they may be making losses, which might make them change their activities. They may move away from doing farming to something that is more profitable because the market is less organized than it could be. I mean, I'm hoping that makes sense, Alex.
Yeah, got it.
Right. So in the international markets, or larger, more developed markets, you have that situation. But if we think about consumer goods, the same thing has to happen. You have to produce before you take to market. So you're trying to produce a good that you will anticipate demand for it will be high, so that supply prices will tend to be high. Which is, if you go back into the section that we looked at with market systems where prices are high, that is where people will produce their goods. So that's one of the reasons why when prices are high for a particular good, like when you go into the market and tomatoes price high, you'd find that a lot of farmers will go and plant tomatoes. Why? Because at this point in time, the market is hot. But they're not the only farmers reacting to what's taking place there. And then by the time they bring their 2 or 3 months later, when they bring their goods to market, they are going to suffer the fact that a lot of people are bringing goods to market, and that means they're going to suffer from the lower prices. What you find tending to happen here in this country is that if you've been in the market for a while, you're going to be paying attention to the patterns of markets. So Diwali is coming up. It being a situation where there's a lot of vegetarian meals being prepared, you're going to find out a lot of farmers in the months before will be planting those types of crops in anticipation that prices will be higher. You follow? They're also going to be doing a secondary crop to prepare for Christmas time, especially in the area of seasonings and salad type activities and lettuce and that kind of stuff, because those are the things that people are going to want to purchase coming down to that point in time. It's the reason why you have apple and fruit carts being set up by a lot of fruit vendors. They're going to buy their apples and grapes for Christmas time, because traditionally in this country we tend to eat more apples and grapes at that point in time than we do at other times. You follow what I'm talking about? So after a while, what you do as a producer is that you start to gauge the market to know when you need to be producing and when you need to be waiting, and looking for those odd seasons where you can get some high prices. Another thing that affects that is obviously going to be weather. And those are things that are actually come up with non-price determinants. So if we continue here, you'll see supply curves develop in a similar amount to demand curves. And therefore, the supply curve, as we move along that curve, prices are going to rise when quantity supplied increase. So when prices fall, quantity supplied. So the relationship is opposite to the downward sloping demand curve. This is an upward sloping supply curve. Now, the same applies with this. If we have a change in price, we're going to call that a movement along the supply curve. So movements along the supply curve, we call it changes in the quantity supplied. That's a movement that we're going to be talking about. As opposed to that, if any of these non-price determinants of supply change, then they will cause supply curves to shift. And these are them here. Changes in the cost of production, changes in the number of firms in the market, changes in the aims of producers, changes in government policy, expectations of changes in price, future changes in price. Well, I added this one here, random shocks and other unpredictable events. So, for example, COVID is an unpredictable event or a random shock that you could look at that would cause supply to be interacted with or interfered with, that will tend to impact upon it. So, for example, COVID caused a big problem with supply chain management. So suppliers cut back on output because people weren't just demanding, or the infrastructure was broken down as a result of the COVID restrictions that went in and closure of borders and that kind of stuff. So goods and services weren't being produced. Simultaneously, for other producers, say for like online services and for things like what we're using now, this service with being able to have a meeting online. These things, a random shock in the system caused the number of sales of these particular bits and pieces of software to just skyrocket, because everybody's trying to use one of these systems to be able to teach their class or do things in the social distancing environment that we're looking at. So we have lots of demand for that. So again, supply would affect either negative or positive depending upon the nature of the good that is in the marketplace. So again, though, when we look at that, we're looking at the supply curve, shifting to the left or to the right, depending upon the impact of it. So when there are changes in that non-price determinant of supply, a rightward shift means that supply would increase at all prices. A leftward shift would mean that it decreases at all prices. All right? Everybody's clear with that distinction between changes in non-price determinants and changes in price determinants of supply? Any questions here? You all could go through this in more detail on your own. So far, so good. Everybody's following?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Yes,
All right. Okay, so there's a video here on supply. This one's kind of funny as well. All right, so y'all could look at, whoops. All right, so it's trying to load the video, but yeah, let me go back to that. All right. So when we'll go to, all right, prices and output determination. So when we bring the two together, we end up in a market situation, and when the market is operating each other, we're looking for equilibrium. An equilibrium in a market is where the conflicting interests of somebody trying to come in. I suspect somebody's trying to come in. Yes, Amelia Smith. Hi, Amelia. Hi, Miss Smith. Can you hear? All right. Okay, back to the presentation here now. All right, so once we get to output when we get to the market situation, you have a situation that we're looking at equilibrium. And equilibrium is a situation where the forces of demand and forces of supply meet each other, and when they interact with each other, they create a natural, or they naturally want to create an equilibrium. And that equilibrium position is a position where the quantities demanded will be equal to the quantities supplied. And you see that happens at price 60 here. At 60, we have the quantities demanded being the same as the quantities supplied. All right, that making sense so far, guys? So that's the equilibrium position. But of course, markets don't always stay in equilibrium. There are things that are going to happen in the market to make it change. So when you have a situation where prices rise, let's say in this case here, you have a price rising above the equilibrium, what happens in the market? When it rises above, it creates a surplus in the market. Because how does each player in the market react to increasing prices? When prices rise, suppliers will be willing to supply more because the higher price would mean better profits. But consumers will demand less. So that creates this situation here where demand, you're going to move from point C here to point D here on the demand curve, but you're going to be moving from C to D here on the supply curve. Seeing that? That means the quantity supplied will be greater than, that's common D, the quantities demanded, that's capital D. And the gap there between the two is if prices were to rise to 80 pence, it'll be a surplus of 33,000 tons, 330,000 tons, because supply is now going to be at 530,000. But consumers will only want to demand 200,000. As you could just come down there, you can see the approximations there. All right. So therefore, how do we get rid of that surplus? Well, if you have surplus in the market, what starts to happen is that suppliers will begin to lower their prices to get rid of the supply, the surplus.
So that's what will happen with perishable goods since we were using agriculture.
It happens with perishable goods and non-perishable as well. It may take longer with non-perishable goods, however, because some suppliers will wait to see if the market will rebound. That's because there's no shelf life for the item. Hi, you guys still hearing me? Hello?
Yeah, I hear you.
Yes, sir, hearing you.
Yes, we're hearing you.
Just had a kind of weird thing happen here. All right, so my bad. No, I just had something just shut down there on me, and I was kind of like, what the hell? All right, right. So as I said before, Mr. Culture asked the question whether or not we're talking about perishable items, and he's right. It happens faster with perishable items because they have a shelf time that they're going to spoil. So if you go into a lot of markets, you might see that coming down to the end of the market day, suppliers will be willing to give me what you want and lower prices to get rid of excess stock because they don't want to go back home with it. If you've ever gone to a food court, you'll also get that situation taking place too. Remember, in a food court, the food only lasts a certain length of time, and then what happens at the end of the day or the end of the evening? And you drop, right? So they drop the prices and they sell it. And in fact, sometimes I go to malls and see people sitting down there late in the evening, and they're waiting for that time frame when the prices are just dropped and people get to buy things at a lower price. Now, the difference with that now is, say you go into an electronics store and the price of phones, for example, is falling, or the person has excessive amount of phones and thing, they can just put it away. But there's a danger with that too, because the technology can become stale. Mr. Culture, that makes sense? If the technology gets stale, then the products that you have there will not fetch the kind of price that you paid for it to start with.
Understood.
If you're talking about retailing in particular, and the key for retail, the most important thing for retail is turnover. Having stock in your hand is having debt in your hand. So retailing is quite different to producing, because with production, you want to get rid of your stock, even if you take a lower price, all right, because you have surplus quantity in your marketplace. So you want to get rid of that. Now, the opposite is also true when we start to get into shortages. Shortages would mean that prices fall. And what happens when prices fall? The quantities demanded start to outstrip the quantities supplied. Now, what happens to move prices back to equilibrium? Well, consumers start to bid the price up. How do they do that? How many of you all ever engaged in price in online search for Fed tickets back in the day? We're talking about now, but back in the day. Any of you all here ever go online to look for tickets for a party for Carnival? Or have you viewed online where people are looking for tickets for certain parties?
Yes.
Right. And that's how, because there's a limit to how much tickets are actually produced, and
And how
therefore
much are
it's a
available.
shortage. Right. And what starts to happen is that consumers start saying, I'll give it $200 for a $100 ticket. And consumers bid the price back up towards equilibrium. That making sense, guys? So that's to ensure that the consumer gets the quantity they want. They will go to the supplier and say, if you give me more, I'll give you more money for it, that kind of stuff. And that pushes prices back towards the equilibrium position of the in this case here on the diagram, it's point C. So we push back towards the equilibrium, both if there's surpluses, suppliers will be dropping their prices, but if prices are lower than the equilibrium, consumers will be willing to pay more for it, to make sure that they get their share, all right, that they want. And we understand this has to do with wants, not so much needs, wants more than anything else. And I'm hoping people understand the distinction. All right, so another thing that happens is that you can have shifts and movements taking place simultaneously. And this is where the market starts to get really tricky, because you can have a non-price determinant changing, causing a shift in a demand curve or supply curve, and that then leads to a movement along the curve. So let's look at this situation here. If we just look at the diagram 2.6, you see that the demand curve starts at D1, that's over here, and something happens and it causes the demand curve to shift to the right. Now that means the demand has increased from D1 to D2 at all prices. Now, the supply curve didn't change, but what happened was that new demand schedule has led to an increase in price, and that will cause an extension in the quantities caused by a movement from point G to point I here, because the price went up. So what might cause something like that? What will cause demand for a particular good to go up? Just like that. Anybody could think of something? What are the 5 shifters that we talked about? You all remember them?
Government policy.
Huh?
Government policy was one.
Yes, government policy is one. So what government policy did you hear about that might cause people to want to demand something now? Oh crap.
Changing the tax on cars, purchase tax on cars.
Very good. Excellent.
Before the price goes up. Yeah.
Well, right.
And the gas, and the gas, and the social electric.
Sorry, say that. And the fuel you're talking about?
Yeah, the change in the price of gas and the move towards CNG and electric cars.
Right. So what you might find, therefore, is that that government policy may move the demand curve from to the right for a particular type. So it might move away from gasoline vehicles to hybrid vehicles. That makes sense? And in that market, it's going to cause prices to rise because
And then the
prior
supply of
to
hybrid vehicles now will increase more so than
not
fuel vehicles.
well, it will increase a little. All right, but is there anything encouraging a shift in the supply curve? So you're going to get a shift in the demand curve.
Just the price.
And the price will go up. That increase in price will encourage people to suppliers to bring in more of those vehicles. But what will cause the supply curve to shift? Because if we get a supply curve shift to the right, it might bring prices back down. You know, something has to encourage them to want to bring it down inside. So this is the kind of analysis that I was talking about. That becomes a little tricky because in the real world, things don't happen one thing at a time. They happen, you know, simultaneously. Life is not you know, hold this and then everything else will go hunky dory. It don't work that way. You understand?
What about subsidies?
Subsidies could do that. So a government intervention in the provision of these hybrid CNG and electric vehicles can actually lead to what we see here next, the supply curve shifting from I would say S2 to S1. But in this case here, in this example here, it went backwards. So supply curves shifted backwards from S1 to S2, causing higher prices, but also causing that higher price led to a contraction in quantities demanded. You following me? All right. But yes, in the case that Mr. Culture talked about there, if there's a subsidy, subsidies tend to lower the cost of a good depending upon how the subsidy is implemented. So if government subsidizes directly to the consumer, then it will encourage producers to bring more in. Right? In our case here, in terms of the import market. That makes sense? And it will also encourage us to want to buy more of those types of goods and move away from the ones that the government doesn't want us to purchase. You all following that situation there? So the thing about it is that whenever there's a shift, it also causes a movement along the curve. That's at the end of the day, because if you see, look at this shift here in the supply curve from S1 to S2. Along the demand curve, there was a movement from G to K, right? Where there was a contraction in the quantities being demanded or decrease in the quantities being demanded from G to K. All right. And that is a new equilibrium position at K. So the first one was where we had S1 and D. That was the lower price. Then something happened to cause the supply curve to shift backwards. It could be, let's say if we're talking about agriculture again, it could be a drought. It could be floods that wiped out crops and stuff like that. So that means the supply has been reduced at all prices. All right. So then supply curve shifted from S1 to S2. That has reduced the quantities being brought to market, resulting in a higher price. And therefore, at that higher price, some people would leave the market. All right. And the quantities demanded or the quantities that are going to be bought and sold will have gone from Q1 down to Q3 in this quantity here. If you look down below here, QE1 to QE3. All right. So that, again, you all can go through this in a little more detail in your on your own, because this presentation is there. All right. So that's the shifting of the supply curves. All right. But whenever there's a shift, remember there's also going to be movement along the curve. And that's something that you want to do. So this is these are the videos. So you have, it's going to automatically try to launch here, but so let me move it here so that you see what I'm talking about. So I have this video on the exceptions to law of demand, but I have a slide on it here as well. So in the video, they're going to talk about a number of those, besides these three here, they're going to talk about a number, but the ones that I want you all to remember the three here that are listed: the inferior good, the Giffen good, and the Wheelman good. And because I believe you all have a question on this as well in your individual assignments. Yes? Waiting for some confirmation. All right, so what is an inferior good? Well, the word inferior means that something's wrong with the good. It's not as good as something else. And what happens is whenever, for goods that are considered inferior, the demand will fall if the price of it falls or if your income rises. All right, so there's an error here. So these are goods that the demand falls when prices or incomes fall. It's actually if prices fall or incomes rise. This is because individuals are only buying these goods because at current prices or income levels, that is what they can afford. Think about new tires versus foreign used tires. Now, generally foreign used tires are cheaper than new tires because they're used, correct? Hoping you all agree with me here, maybe.
Yeah, and we should also talk about people buying stale meat and
correct
potatoes and all that kind of stuff.
Right. And the reason for that is because they would buy it because that's what their income can afford, or at the current prices, that's what people can afford. So an inferior good would be, the reaction to inferior good is if the price of that inferior good goes down or prices in general goes down, it frees up your income to be able to spend it on those goods that you think are superior or better. Making sense? So if you were buying foreign used tires all the time, you might, because of a fall in price of the foreign used tires, you might decide, okay, listen, the new tires might work out better for me. Or if you have an increase in your income, you're going to buy less foreign used tires and more new tires because you're going to get better value. That make sense? So those are inferior goods. Now, a Giffen good, on the other hand, is the same as an inferior good, but the reaction is extreme. So that once prices fall or incomes rise, the consumer stops buying those goods altogether. All right. Now, Giffen is the gentleman who to observe this phenomenon. First, it happened after World War II, and that was because people were buying. Well, the example is that people were spending money on bread because that's all they could have gotten, and especially a particular type of bread too. It was a type of bread that was for a second. So let me take that. Oh, right, cool. All right, it was a type of bread that was being produced that today we call whole wheat, but back then it was called black bread. And during the World War II, there was this bombing that was going on, and people in Britain in particular, because they couldn't grind the wheat, it meant that the wheat remained in a whole state. It was like a one grind, and then they had to make bread with it. The flour was very coarse. That bread today we know it as whole wheat bread, or it's the more expensive bread. But back then it was viewed as something that was negative. So the minute that incomes rose after World War II, they would not buy that bread. They would buy other things they considered to be more important or superior goods like meat or vegetables, things that they weren't getting during the war. A second time that this was observed too has been in China, where as soon as Chinese families start to earn money, this is after the opening up of their economy and the movement towards the controlled capitalism that they have at this point in time, families stop eating rice and then move to things like potatoes because they associated the consumption of rice with very, what's the word I want to use? Well, they associated rice consumption with being poor, and therefore, if you wanted to be rich, then you wouldn't buy rice anymore. You'd buy macaroni and potatoes and other forms of starches rather than rice. So that was the second time it's been observed in history, especially from a broad developed state. All right. Now the thing about it is that Giffen and inferior goods can also behave on a personal position as well, because for each one of you, you have identified goods that you consider inferior or Giffen. I'll give you my example. I cannot stand mackerel. And that's because when I was in university, because of the price of mackerel, we ended up buying a lot of tins of mackerel in the apartment. And that meant we kind of OD'd on mackerel. And as a result of that, to this day, I can't stand that good. So for me, it's a Giffen good. I could have only afforded mackerel when I was in school. And once I left school and started to earn income, forget it. Mackerel, like, the yuckiest thing ever.
Yeah, I know the vibe. When I was studying in England, chicken, right? Chicken
Right.
and macaroni, and I eat chicken and macaroni right now.
Exactly.
My father have an allergy because he was in World War II. He have an allergy to like things like corned beef because the soldiers used to take all the meat and everything and just leave us with some kind of weird things like what do you call that? What's that tin tuna in a tin?
Yeah.
So he hate that stuff now.
Right. Tinned goods in particular, some people develop allergies for that because there are two aspects that's working there. One is the emotional aspect of what that type of good represented for them in their lives. And the second part of it is that there's a consumption function with it that that impacts upon the person's well-being, sense of well-being. All right. Hold on a second, guys. Please leave. You can do that afterwards. All right. So the other good I have here is Veblen goods, and the video talks a lot about Veblen goods. But he uses other names for it. So I listed the other names that are utilized for Veblen. But again, the reason why it's called Veblen is because this gentleman, Veblen, on this first documented it. Conspicuous consumption, status goods, snob appeal goods, or ostentatious goods. It's the same thing. People consume certain goods simply because it appears to give them a sense of status. So you drive a Rolls Royce, you drink, what's that, champagne that there's always be talking about, Cristal. Can you think of anything else that is status oriented goods that people consume because
Henny.
Sorry?
Hennessy.
Hennessy, yes, okay, that's true. Anything else? Anybody?
Caviar.
There you go, caviar and champagnes, those kind of things. You figure you reach, you reach, yeah, kind of stuff. So one of the things that we see in this country that is utilized for snob appeal is the kind of car you drive. So depending upon what you drive, you can actually kind of indicate what status somebody might be in. So those are the kind of things, and it's not only here in Trinidad, it's internationally. People who want to distinguish themselves from other people would buy something that gives status. But the problem is if that good starts to become accessible, which means the price is falling, then they're not going to buy anymore. They will stop buying that good and buy more of the good that is more expensive to remain exclusive. So those are the exceptions to the law of demand. That making sense, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I drive Subaru.
Sorry, not hearing you very clear.
I said yes because I drive a Subaru.
All right. And where would you put your Subaru in relation to um, the what's the word I want to use? The ladder of status.
Used to be good, but now I give it to my son.
I hear you. I hear you. Yeah, actually, in certain car freaks and that kind of stuff, they just kind of focus on the Subaru for the racing engine. That's the WRX version of it, because of rally and that kind of stuff. But again, here we're talking about, you're buying Rolls Royce, or you're using the exclusive Mercedes line, or worse yet, you buy a supercar, of which there are only 14 produced in the entire world. That kind of stuff, a Lamborghini, in which there are only 20 of them around the world. That kind of stuff. That's conspicuous consumption that you tend to see. You just get these stories online with that as well. So you could
I would
remind me,
do
guys.
that.
I need to change this slide a little bit. I have to change some wording on this. So I'll go back in
Yeah,
and change and load the new one. All right.
yeah,
All
because
right. So
if you have to be spec, I gonna buy.
what's
Only
that?
13 be spec. Subaru I gonna buy.
Uh-huh.
Like only 13 produce.
You like this Pepsi?
The what?
Actually, if you do like this Pepsi model,
I'm not really a big car person. I'm more of a truck person. Not so much of a car. Well, I mean, I had a dream car. I always wanted to buy a Honda Prelude, but never got into it. It really was a matter that it remained beyond my capacity to buy vehicles like that. But I mean, given a chance, maybe I'd want to buy, if I'm into the trucks and stuff like that, one of those. Um, I really don't know, because I really like I have a Ford Ranger, and I really like my Jeep, my truck. So that's the thing for me. But prior to that, I went kind of off-roading and stuff like that. So those vehicles are the ones that appeal to me, as opposed to
F-150.
So, yeah. The truck I have is similar to the F-150. But there's a new F-150 that came out the other day that kind of blowing my mind. But of course, we can't allow that, especially now that they've increased the custom duties on all vehicles. So that's gonna cause a lot of problems. All right. So the last slide that I have here is about price controls, and this is something that's important. There are a couple of videos about it, but you're gonna look at it from the market point of view. And in the market point of view, they look at these things: price ceilings, price floors, government subsidies, and taxation, as things that are negative in the system, because they tend to interfere with how the market works. So we know the market tries to find equilibrium, but when government interferes with it, then what ends up happening is that they prevent the market from getting to its natural equilibrium. So a ceiling, for example, is a price ceiling, sets a maximum price beyond which you can't go. Now, if you set a maximum price below the equilibrium, that will lead to market inequality, because if it's if it's at a high if it's at a price, let's say the market price is $30, but they set the ceiling at $20, then at the low price, a ceiling of below the equilibrium, it will cause demand to outstrip supply. And unless government subsidizes suppliers to bring more goods to the market, then you're going to end up with that market inequality, and it's going to create scarcity. Similarly, with a price floor, if you set a floor, which is a minimum price that you can charge for something, and tends to work in the two areas. You have it in, we actually have one in Trinidad, it's called the minimum wage. That's a price floor. So technically speaking, no worker should sell their services for less than $15 an hour. All right. Now, what happens with that? That simply means that there are lots of buyers all right, of that good of labor who will not buy at 15. So it leads to unemployment. Unless, of course, again, government steps in and subsidizes firms to take that, or there's heavy and stringent management of that particular thing. So the idea is really that interventions, any intervention that government utilizes, taxes, subsidies, floors, ceilings, they all interfere with the way in which the market operates. And they tend to be looked at as being inefficient. All right. But we have to understand why governments would do it. And the reason why governments intervene in markets is to protect people. Either they're protecting consumers or they're protecting producers. They're either trying to increase the 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 amount of production that's taking place, or they're lowering prices to protect consumers, which is one of the reasons why we subsidize water production in Trinidad, electricity production in Trinidad. Those things are subsidized to make it affordable for the common citizen. So if you think of subsidies in Trinidad, we have the fuel subsidy, which they're getting rid of now. You have agricultural subsidies. You have the health subsidy. Think about free healthcare access. If you go to the states and stuff, none of this is available, except maybe you'll get agricultural subsidies and stuff like that. From next year, they're going to remove all taxes on ICT equipment. That's going to be great. That includes mobile phones and computers and digital devices. That's going to be kind of counterproductive because that's going to cause a lot of people to want to import those things. I was actually looking at upgrading my phone, so now I'm going to wait until next year and treat myself to a new phone, that kind of stuff. But why do they do it? Sometimes they do it to protect students, protect citizens, and it could be all citizens in general, or it could be specific citizens in particular parts of the economy, especially those who are more disenfranchised. They can be directing it to change our consumption of particular types of goods. So, for example, the government has levied more taxes on cigarettes, 20% increase in excise duties on cigarettes. The fact of the matter is that that is supposedly the way he placed it. And if anybody listened to the budget presentation today, the way he positioned it was to prevent or to reduce cigarette consumption. But that's not true. Cigarette consumption is habit forming. So it means that regardless of where prices are, people will still purchase cigarettes. So the idea that the government is doing this because they are trying to help people is ingenuine because of the nature of the consumption of cigarettes and tobacco products. They're habit forming.
Communicable diseases, angle.
Yep, all of that talk was to try and to make it sound better than what it really means is that because the demand for those types of goods are inelastic or they don't change easily because you're talking about habit forming goods, the objective there is to raise more revenue. Same thing with alcohol and that kind of stuff. To encourage production, subsidies are utilized. All right. That means that one of the pillars that they put up here is food security. So they want to encourage more agricultural activities in the country so that in order to do that, they're going to give subsidies and they're going to give tax breaks. They may even try to set up some floors and ceilings for people to benefit from that. That'll be farmers and so on. And of course, one of the other things that we tend to do is also to try and save foreign exchange reserves. So that will also be that they would be targeting certain types of goods with either taxes to prevent people from wanting to buy it or lower the demand for it, like what they did with the foreign used cars and the new car market. And as I said, it may be because there are certain things that are happening in the market system that are harmful to the citizens, or they want to achieve particular national developmental goals. So there are a host of reasons that governments can use price controls. And when you look at the videos, you're going to see that some people view them as being, kind of dangerous. So the key things that we looked at in this is demand and supply. We looked at the laws of demand and supply. We looked at individual demand and supply schedules, market demand and supply schedules, individual demand and supply curves, price changes and movements along the demand curve and supply curve, non-price determinants, changes, and shifts of demand and supply curves. Now, that's about a critical one because a lot of the questions in the quiz was centered around price changes and price movements along the demand curve and stuff. And then, of course, exceptions to the law of demand and price controls and government intervention. All right, so that's the content that I have up that you can look at. Anybody has any questions they want to ask at this point in time?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Why would I invest in a gas station if they're switching to natural gas, switching from gas to electric and
Well, I don't know what to tell you, but I was thinking about that myself when I listened to it. There is going to be a window of opportunity for you to take it. I think what the government is trying to do is to offload some of the expenditure that it engages in to maintain and monitor these types of activities, and that is the thing they're trying to do. They're trying to shut down or reduce their expenditure on some things that they're now viewing as being that the private sector could take over. So the private sector, if they take over a gas station, might be able to do things a little better than other people. That I think is what they're trying to deal with. But how long that window would last?
They also shut down the private gas stations last year.
All right, but now they're going back on it. So they've changed their mind again.
Yeah.
Could it be the cost of converting to CNG if private citizens take over that, and then they could see about converting to CNG because they've been pushing the CNG for a couple of years well, and there are very few gas stations that carry CNG.
Well, you have to put in the infrastructure for it, and that has been the problem. The problem is that with the infrastructure required is costing NP too much money. So what they're looking at, if you privatize a station, then the private investor will invest in it and develop the resources for it. Now, interestingly enough, Massey has done that. They have their own gas stations. So this might provide an opportunity for large entities like Massey Holdings to purchase some of these gas stations and take them over. Also, Unipet. Unipet might go on. Yes.
An answer.
Answer McCall, yeah. And they may have the money to be able to put in the necessary resources to make the conversion. But again, the problem is they're all going to have to be buying their fuel from one provider. That's Heritage Fuel. And that will be both CNG and the regular diesel, gas, and super, and that kind of stuff. I'm not seeing too much necessarily good happening out of that, but who knows? We'll see how it goes. Handing it over to the private sector could be dangerous. Sorry?
Unipet shut down last year. Unipet?
Unipet has threatened the market.
They tried to shut down Unipet.
Well,
they stopped supplying them.
They did because Unipet ran into operating and operating issues. They didn't have enough money to pay for the gas they were getting delivered, so that creates some problems for them. So that could be something that is playing off in this situation that is looking at. I'm just checking to see if anybody came in that I didn't take note of. Yeah, but that's a good conversation. And again, guys, remember one of the assignments that you have is the articles journal, and the budget is going to generate a lot of articles that you can pull out, and they will have a lot of micro and macroeconomic implications that you can utilize for your journal activity. So it's always nice when we have a budget speech in and around the class time for this semester, because it gives a lot of stimulus activity for people who would like to participate in that type of activity and to find articles that are economic in nature. The only thing you need to pay attention to is making sure that you are looking at more reputable people who are commenting on things rather than what I tend to call the rum shop talk. So one of the groups that I expect will react to this budget speech almost immediately would be the Foreign Used Car Dealers Association. They will probably react to that. I expect the fuel, because there are still a few people who own gas stations. Right. Somebody asked a question. They were asking, what date is the quiz open to? Quiz 4, quiz 4 will stay open, I think, until the next week Sunday.
Kenapa big deal, please? Kenapa
Sorry?
big deal, please? Yeah, Lagantai. Yeah.
And I'm meeting Vijay there. He banned Legantai outside there.
Yeah, somebody call another Legantai.
Sonia, you were asking a question?
No, sir. When you're finished, I just want to touch on assignment 1 and the group assignment.
No problem. Actually, I want to talk to you all about that as well.
Okay, great.
So ask a question now. If you want, we can move on.
Just in terms of the layout for assignment 1, when I looked at it, there were just 2 questions.
Yep. And it's 2 questions with numerous parts.
Right. So I'm not sure how you want this to be laid out. If you just want each question per page, or you want it in an essay form, or
I would say lay it out questions and parts. So you'd have 2 sections to your response.
right.
All right. So section 1 will be question 1, and you make sure you respond and answer to the questions totally, and then you break up when you get to the end of question 1, which might take you about 3 or 4 pages depending upon the amount of analysis. But just make sure you label it question 1, part A, part B, part C, that kind of stuff. Then you move to section B as well.
Right.
Vijay, you back? Vijay? Vijay left or he came back in? Can't see.
So he's probably enjoying the Legantai he just ordered.
I don't know. I'm hoping he's still. I had to mute him off there, but.
Yes.
Badri, you okay? All right. But at least he's listening to the class and still trying to do things. All right. All right. So in terms of the that first assignment, I think, did I set up the submission points for those things, right? I am not sure.
You have set a 300 word limit. That will be on each part.
Don't kill yourself with that. Don't kill yourself with that.
All right. Okay.
All right. Don't kill yourself with that. Just answer the questions as completely as you think you can. All right.
No, each classroom doesn't have it.
I need to set up the submission points for you all for these assessments. All right. Quiz 2. Somebody wanted to know the deadline for it. We turn my editing on, and you'll see that. You're seeing me here, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So sharing this. There's so many things open, it's going to take a little while.
All of those things. Just open them and put them around that house. I couldn't eat because I didn't open the family. I don't see why I don't know.
All right. So thank you very much, whoever that is. All right. So I have it open until the 18th of October. and I'm giving people 3 attempts. I know this one might be a little tricky. All right. Everybody's heard me there, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, cool. Okay, so
the question I believe was
any other question? Sorry?
I believe the question she asked was concerning quiz 4.
Yeah, quiz 4 was it's not quiz 4, it's unit 4 quiz.
Yeah, unit 4 quiz.
Yeah, that's the quiz for this stuff that we covered today.
Okay.
All right. It's unit 4 quiz, basically. Demand and supply. So next section is theory of the firm. That's a little tricky. That's going to take us about there's a fair amount of content that has to go through with that too. All right, so in terms of group work, I've been monitoring the chats going on online, and what I wanted to find out was how far are people into finalizing their choice of countries. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I don't want 2 groups doing the same countries. So if I can get some updates, it'll be good.
So
Anybody?
which country we're just waiting for you to confirm if we could have used that country?
What country was that?
Netherlands.
Who's we, by the way? Which group are you guys?
Group 2.
That would be me as well. Culture.
You're in that group as well? All right.
Yeah.
I'm looking group 3. Okay, so the last comment I saw on your group 2 chat is right. So I didn't get a request in your chat for approval for the country. So far, though, I'm not seeing anybody else suggesting the Netherlands. So I'm going to assign you that group. What I'll do is I will take note of it and I'll update your group name from just group 1 to Netherlands. Okay, that'll be on the e-classroom. So I'll rename your group so that way we can let people know. Looking for a pen. Lick so fast. All right. All right. So you guys are group 2, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. So I'm just gonna group 2, and you all are doing the Netherlands.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody else? Tell me. I know. Was there a group at India?
Group 3 had India.
All right. So who's in? But Sharon, what group are you with? Sharon?
Group 3. I think my Janet's sticking, sorry.
All right, that's okay. India, you all said, right? You all
yeah.
finalized that?
Yes, sir.
All right, group. All right. So any other people from other groups here?
Yes, sir. Group 4 countries still to be determined.
What groups you all come into in mind with?
Again, to be determined.
No. What groups did you all suggest in your chat?
You mean what
What countries did? Sorry, my bad. What countries did you all suggest?
No, we haven't gotten quite there yet. We formed our group, but we haven't quite started communication on that just yet.
All right, boss. Only running out of time. Just letting you all know.
Yeah.
All right. So, what group is that?
Group 4.
Group 4. All right. So I'll put this term here. Slackers. All right. Who's
Oh
in
my.
group 1?
Low blow, sir, low blow.
A teasing, a teasing.
That's slackers.
I don't appreciate.
So group 5 will
I
be
don't
slackers
appreciate
as
you.
well.
Yeah.
Slackers as well.
No.
We now added, well, one of the newer persons to the class. So we
I
haven't
don't say
started
prove
discussions on it.
No. That's
But we will engage in discussion this week.
You better. What about group 1? Who remembers a group 1?
I am.
Who's I am? Deborah.
Yeah.
Deborah, what groups are you all? What countries are you all thinking of?
Well, we haven't really decided.
You all had any suggestions at all?
Yes, we have Japan, we have Australia.
All right.
We have to get
better.
consensus on it.
Japan. That's fine. I just needed to know that you all had something considering, not like the slackers that we have here. So Japan, Australia, and which one again?
That's it. That's it.
All right. So those are two excellent choices. They're both fairly developed nations, and they're interesting countries to learn things about. All right. But slackers 4 and 5, you all need to get all your act together, okay? I don't know if it's in this group here that they were talking about Venezuela. Was there any group here that was discussing Venezuela? No? It might be my other class. All right. I think I saw a chat here. All right. So Mr. Badri said he's in group 4, and the same goes for group 1. Nishabash. All right, but at least you guys have some options that you're looking at there. All right. So the point I'm trying to make here about your group work now is, if we look at the questions for your thing, because I noticed that a lot of people is simply thinking they want to take a question and tackle it. You have to look into relationships between the questions that are being asked, guys. It's not that it's simply I will just do question 1 and question. Not all the questions can be treated like that. Some of the questions are interrelated, so you need to be careful with that. Look at the questions, and I mean, if you all want to have discussions about the questions, we could meet. Again, you all don't have to wait to these classes. You can message me, and we can have a one-to-one session with just you and your group. I could just pull up one of these meetings with you all, or you all could host a meeting and invite me and that kind of stuff. All right. Feel free to use this type of stuff to meet with each other. Do not leave it for last minute, because you're going to have competing activities going on in other classes. So you want to pay attention to that. All right, guys? Okay. Any other questions? Those are the 2 things I wanted to tackle. Get your stuff going with your group. Make those group decisions. Should I have a class next week? Or you want to call it by air? You guys get to decide. What I can do is when I load the content, you all can determine if you want to have. By the way, I'm going to stop presenting. You all can decide if you want to have a session or not. You all can just message me. I'll put up the content. And the content is going to be fairly lengthy. I'll probably try and split it into 2 areas: theory firm 1 and 2, because there's a lot of information about firms and their behavior. So I believe some of the questions about the films is in fact on the um, in one of your questions for your online assignment, individual assignment. By the way, how's that coming along? People are doing the research for that? No? I find there's a lot of silence.
Trying.
You're trying? All right, so I'll build the submission points and put in the Turnitin blocks for you all to be able to submit and check your 15% submission ratio and stuff like that. All right, guys. Any questions about the content or anything else that anybody wants to ask at this point in time?
Not right now for me.
All right, so then we could call it Jorge for the evening.
So just one thing, you said the deadline date for the draft, is it still on 12th of October?
12th of October.
So you said if we have a draft for individual projects, we would take it on the 12th, by the 12th of October.
Did I already say that?
Yes, sir.
All right, those drafts you need to email to me directly. Don't put them in the classroom. I was kind of mentioning to you guys, want to keep some of that stuff off the classroom. So the drafts I could look at and just give you a heads up and let you know what's going on. But send it to me directly, okay? But I need to build the Turnitin for you all so that you can do the comparison to see what kind of citation issues you might be coming across with. So I'm kind of lapsing on that a little bit. I'll work on that. Yes, Karen, what's up?
No, I didn't say
All right.
anything.
No, well, I just said a movement. All right. Anybody else has any questions? You want to put it in the chat, or you all want to chat with me?
One more thing.
On
The 11th and 12th, the draft is supposed to be submitted by that assignment one.
I think we had decided on the 11th and the 12th. The 11th, I think. But I think it was the Sunday.
Okay, so that's the 11th. All right. Okay, no problem.
That's a draft one kind of thing. Yeah,
Right.
the Sunday is the 11th. Yeah.
Okay,
Most
and
deadlines, most deadlines will be set up on a Sunday midnight kind of thing. Those you would submit via you'd email directly to me. They want to have a look at it, and then you can then you can start the process online. But I'll set up those Turnitin points and submission things for those of you who want to get it done and out of the way one time. All right, Mr. Culture, you want to ask something?
Yeah, I say, and I find you real brave. No other lecturer would ever allow people to turn in draft documents because they get overwhelmed by work.
Yeah, but this is not in your major. Economics is not something that the questions that we're asking here are highly economics related. They're not everyday things that you're dealing with. So I don't expect that. I don't want all your hot on your head too much. I mean, this is supposed to be a class that you would have, learn a lot, but not be too stressed about it. That my thinking about all of these college core courses, they're not supposed to be high stress courses. But at the end of the day,
because January last year, not last year before, a lecturer failed me by 0.5.
What? 0.5?
Failed me by 0.5, and when I did over the course, I got 77%.
No, that's unreasonable.
Wow.
That's highly unreasonable. That makes no sense to me whatsoever.
You know what unreasonable? I didn't get A because I got 89.9.
That's because you know what? Your lecturer probably doesn't know how Banner gradebook works. That's why that happened. And that, you know the hard part about that? That's an IT lecturer. Tell me that's an IT lecturer. You're not supposed to turn off the recording, right? All right, guys.
So I was one of the social causes. Oh,
Some people not comfortable with the environment, and unfortunately, I will give you all the benefit of the doubt. Just just don't take advantage. That's the main thing I want to say. All right, guys. So we'll call it Jorge for the evening, and
So,
yes,
concerning the live session you might have next class, I might have to miss part of it because one of my other courses, the times kind of.
flashing. Well, again, that's why I'm recording the session so that if you do miss it, you could check back in and listen to the recording. It's not going to be the same as having the opportunity to ask questions, but once you listen to the recording, then you can also post questions to me in the WhatsApp chat. So that way, if you have something that came out of that particular meeting, then you could ask a question about it directly, or you could WhatsApp me in the group, or just simply um, message me directly, either in the group or privately. Doesn't matter.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so I'm not worried about people missing sessions because the idea is record it and put the recording online so students who don't make the class can log in and listen to what happened, what they missed. All right. At least that's the instructions that have been given, and that it makes sense. If you miss a session, you can look at the recording and see what's going on. All right, guys. Okay. So let's call it quits for the night. I have it at 7:30. We did quite well. 5:30, 6:30, 7, 2 hours. I'm good to go. All right. Good night, everybody. Get home safely. Try not to get wet in the rain and thing.
Good night, sir.
All right, guys. Thanks for
Good
coming.
night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, Mr. Badri. Good night, Miss Bash. Sorry y'all couldn't hear us audio-wise.